Hey everyone, welcome to part 10 of the Azure Masterclass V2. And in this module, we're exploring monitoring and security, two things that are actually pretty intertwined. I need to make sure I'm monitoring, I need to make sure I've got great insight to help ensure I can achieve the security I need for my environment. So we're going to explore a few different areas. We're going to look at Azure Monitor, which is really our insight and our entry point to most things monitoring in Azure and even beyond. But we'll see how that then leads into aspects of security. We'll look at some of the security solutions and then finish off with two key things we've mentioned in other modules, specifically managed identity and then Azure Key Vault. So that's our goals for this module. So I think about monitoring in Azure. It is a shared responsibility model. That's an important thing to understand. Remember, we talked about IaaS and PaaS and software as a service. Well, depending on which of those services we're using, the responsibilities shift. But for any of those things, and let's kind of think about this, you'll often hear about the idea of RACI. So if I think about RACI, because even if I'm not responsible, so the R for responsible for some aspect of a service, maybe I'm accountable. So I'm actually still ultimately will be held accountable for making sure we meet that service. Although maybe I'm not doing the actual job, I need to make sure this requirement, this regulatory need is being met. Maybe I'm consulted, so maybe I give input, I give guidance on something, but I'm not actually responsible, I'm not actually held accountable for it. And maybe I'm just informed. It could potentially be for some type of service, I'm the end business user, and I just need to know if there are things going on. But we have these different aspects of responsible, accountable, consulted, informed for all of our different types of services. And when I think of monitoring, even if I'm not maybe responsible for a particular aspect of the service, maybe I still want to be informed. So I still do monitoring so I know about if there is some change to the performance, if there is some outage. Maybe I am being held accountable, so I need to monitor these things to understand, am I meeting the SLA that my architecture needs to meet? So even if I'm not responsible for a service, it's the responsibility maybe of Azure, I may still be accountable for it. I may still want to be informed around it. So we still think of this even if I'm not responsible for some part of a service. Now, with that said, as I move up from infrastructure as a service, like VMs, to platform as a service, to software as a service, I am responsible for less and less, but that still, again, may not change what I want to be informed about, what I may still want to monitor so I know, am I meeting some SLA? Is there some service outage that is going to impact my overall application I'm offering to my customers? So I have to have a plan. I have to understand what is important to my service. What do I need to know about? And then make sure I'm monitoring for those components. So I want to think about service health. I want to think about availability. And that Azure Monitor is going to be that primary conduit into all the things I want to know about. So what I have to think about is for any service I have, what are the things that matter? And what level of detail do I need for all the different scenarios? So we have to think about, it's not just, is general health being? What if there's a problem? If I need to troubleshoot, what data would I need in troubleshooting environments? What data might I need to be able to feed in as part of a security solution? So I have to think of all the different layers to make sure I'm not missing something. And again, monitoring and observability is going to feed into DevOps, it's going to feed into security. So what's first? Well, we always think today, identity. From a security world, the network is not really the security perimeter anymore. It's shifted to the identity. Many services we use don't live in our network anymore. They're out in the cloud somewhere. They're used from any device, anywhere. So trying to use the network really doesn't work very well, especially in a zero trust type scenario. I don't want to just trust, hey, you're on this network, you're VPN'd in, you're good to go. We want to constantly evaluate and check. So my Azure Active Directory, that's our first point. Remember, Azure AD is the identity provider for our Azure services. So step one is my Azure Active Directory. Now, there are many different types of monitoring we can do against Azure AD. There are some obvious ones. There are things like sign-ins. And sign-ins obviously can help track, well, are we getting some weird combination? We're getting some new anomalous type behavior. The sign-ins are out of our regular pattern. They're from locations we don't normally see. So monitoring the sign-ins attempts, so even ones that fail, that will give us some indication of, hey, maybe there's some compromise trying to occur. There's audits. So I can go and see, hey, are things changing? And it's probably easier to just go and look at this. So if we quickly jump over, if I was to go and look at my Azure Active Directory, and I scroll down, and we'll notice straight away, I can see, well, there's sign-in logs, there's audit logs, there's provisioning logs. But there's even more than this. If I'm doing identity protection, there would be logs specific to that. And if we go and look at our diagnostic settings, now, diagnostic settings, we're going to see time and time again on all of the services, and we're going to come back to this. But if I was to add a diagnostic setting, well, now it shows me all the different categories of log. And here you can see I can break it down even further. Sure, there's the audit logs, there's the sign-in logs. But then we can see things like non-interactive user sign-in logs, service principal sign-in logs, some service principal used by an application, by a service, managed identity, ADFS sign-in log, risky users coming from that identity protection, user risk events. So there's all these other types of logs that I may care about. And yes, I can view them in the portal, for example, but maybe I actually want to get them to some other type of solution. And so what we're going to see throughout all of this is, yes, there might be some native way to view them, but it's probably also going to be, hey, I want to send them to something else. Now, for these logs, we often think about retention, the ability to go back and view them at some other time. So from a retention perspective, I can think it's 7 days retention or 30 days if I have the premium Azure AD attached to my tenant. So I have an Azure AD Premium P1 license. And there are some other combinations as well. But if I have premium, it generally adds additional days to that. But remember, as we saw, I can always take some of these logs and send them somewhere else as well. So that's our identity. Then we actually get into Azure resources. And if we remember the top level real construct for where I can provision resources, well, that's in a subscription. Now, the key type of log that I think of with a subscription, well, this is going to be our activity log. Now, the activity log is all about control plane activities that are to resources within that subscription. This is not data plane. This is not I updated a table. This is not I created a new blob. This is, hey, I created a resource. I modified a resource. I deleted a resource. I regenerated some access key for a resource. Anything done at the control plane will register and be saved into this activity log. Now, there are other things as well. For example, there's service health. Things that have impacted some resource that I have within my subscription. And these are maintained for 90 days. And we can go and see these as well. So once again, if we jump over super quickly, if I was to now just go and look at a subscription in my environment, let's look at this one, and look at the activity log, well, I will see things related to the control plane. So for example, here you can see, hey, I started a virtual machine an hour ago, and I can see who did it. I can see details about what happened there. So I want to see the exact time, so 3:49 GMT. I can see the JSON around that, so all the details. I could also see change history. So I get that detail of everything. So old values, new values on that control plane. Because it started, it gets some additional information around it. But I get all of the data that I need to see. And once again, I can export the activity logs and we see this familiar diagnostic settings. And once again, I can pick what do I care about. So we can see, yes, administrative categories. We also see things like the service health. So if I want to send out service health, alerts, recommendations, and I get this familiar set of destinations, which again, we're going to come back to. So we have these built-in logs for our subscription. And once again, we saw there's a certain amount of built-in retention, but if we want to, hey, we can send them somewhere else again. The idea being, maybe I need to keep them for longer than that. Maybe I have some other system that's going to perform analysis against them to help me detect variances, help me detect signs of intrusion, and some vulnerability. So that's why we have this capability to actually send them somewhere else as well. Maybe it just natively does what I want, hey, but maybe it doesn't. So the whole point is all of these logs right here, this is giving me those control plane activities. Now within the subscription, then we have actual resources. Could be a storage account. Now, this is all about the Azure Resource Manager. These are resources in ARM. And these could be a VM, a Kubernetes cluster, but there are various resources. Now, those resources, they have their own sets of logs. They have their own metrics. So metrics is some numeric value that's in a time series. So it's some number, maybe CPU utilization at a certain time increment. So it's a time series database, time moves on, this counter value, so it's always numeric, moves on as well. Now this is where it starts to get interesting. I'm always going to have metrics. And those are just available. And those metrics get sent to Azure Monitor Metrics, a time series database. So they're there for me. There are also logs. However, these don't actually get generated until I do something. So to get the logs, I have to configure. Because there is no native storage to handle text-based logs for the various types of logs that will come out of resources. And these logs will vary by the type of resource. Like imagine a database is going to have very different types of logs it might generate compared to a virtual machine. So I have to say, hey, I want these logs. And we're going to explore that in a second. So I can get logs, but they don't get generated by default. There's no built-in automatic storage to actually have those. Now for the metrics, these are going to get stored for 93 days. It's that worst case scenario of 3 months if there were, I don't think there's ever is 3 months in a row that have 31 days, maybe there is, but 93 days. So I have 3 months of metrics that I can go back and look at. That's really the key point about this. And I guess this would be a good time to look at the diagnostic settings. So once again, let's look at one of these. So if I was to go and look at a virtual machine, for example, let's go and look at my demo VM. So look at my virtual machines, demo VM. I don't have to do anything special, but under monitoring, I just see metrics. Now the exact metrics you will see will again vary by resource. A Kubernetes cluster will have very different metrics from a VM, will have very different metrics from a storage account. But for example, if I was to just go and look at this VM, I'm looking at the virtual machine host. So it's things that it's getting from really the fabric. It's not looking inside the guest operating system. But that is an option as well, which I'd get then counters around logical disk space, things that it has to ask the OS about. But I can pick a metric. So for example, maybe it's something interesting, percentage CPU, and it shows me. It shows me that percentage CPU use for that virtual machine. So those are just standard, those are just built in for me. Then I have diagnostic settings, and then, hey, I can set up a diagnostic storage account, for example, to send some of this data to, and that's going to gather certain additional metrics for that. Let's go and look at something a bit more standard. Let's look at a Cosmos DB. So I want to show the diagnostic settings. You already saw it twice. Some resources behave a little bit differently. But now if I look at my diagnostic settings, notice logs. Well, the logs are very different for a Cosmos DB database. Hey, data plane request, Mongo request, query runtime statistics. And then sure, at the end, it does have some metrics I can send as well. What I'm really interested is in the destination details. We always have these, essentially these three core options. And then also there's the ability to integrate now with some partner solutions. The partner solutions are, as the name suggests, made by some ISV, some independent software vendor, and they have some solution that can work with those logs that would then give us some feature. Maybe it's a SIM solution, so it wants the logs so it can monitor them and give data around it. So if we think, what are those three options? Why do I have this log analytics workspace, storage account, and event hub? Where do they differ? Where would I use them? So I can think about, well, this is just the ones we've explored so far, and we already saw there were metrics and logs were available to be sent. So what we have now is this idea of diagnostic settings that are pretty much the same for all of them. Now this is optional. I don't have to do this, but if I want the logs from resources, this is the only way I can go and turn those on. So I have these diagnostic settings, and this applies to really all of these different options. And I've got three core targets, and then we had those partner solutions ones. So I have a storage account. I had Event Hub. And then I had, I'm going to leave a bit of space for this one, then I had a Log Analytics workspace. Now, Log Analytics, you'll also hear called Azure Monitor Logs. It's the same thing. It's still a Log Analytics workspace underneath, so you may just hear it called Azure Monitor Logs, but it's a Log Analytics workspace. So these three options available to us. And if I think about what my possible use cases are of why I want to send logs, well, maybe I'm sending them just to keep them. I have to keep these logs for a huge amount of time. I don't really have any intention of having to interact with them. I just have to keep them. Well, in which case, storage is a very attractive option. Because for storage, well, it can be long-term, and it's cheap. It's just create in blobs. So it's very, very cheap, but it's not super useful to interact with. If I actually want to go and start searching for things or running aggregations, this is not a great option. But if I just have to store it and then maybe I'll bring it back into something else later on, hey, that works. Event Hub, remember, is a publish subscribe. So I'm publishing the data and then something else can subscribe and read those records off. So this would be very useful if I had some kind of external SIM. So I had some solution, some incident management, event management solution that I need to send it the data to pretty much in real time, and it's then going to do some work. So this publish subscribe lets multiple systems read off and get those records. Now, Log Analytics, we're going to come back to this in more detail. This is very useful, yes, for the storage, but it's more about the fact that once it's stored there, I can do very, very rich analytics against it. So I can then analyze. I have this whole Kusto query language to which I can run queries and get information about this. And so with many solutions, if I actually want to maybe get some insight into the data in Azure, we'll send it to a Log Analytics workspace, because then not only am I storing it, I'm then actually have the ability to run queries against it, to get insight against it. There's machine learning that builds on top and looks at, well, what's the regular type of interaction and numbers we see. So now I can see something that falls outside of that normal behavior. And we'd also have, and I should write this on the board as well, there are those third-party ISV solutions if you've enabled those. Many of those will use the Event Hub, but rather than you having to go and think about, they're pre-configured for you. That's really the idea around those. Additionally, we can set these up from diagnostic settings. But another thing I could do, let's say as a company, I have a requirement that I need everything sent to a Log Analytics workspace to make sure we've got some central solution that's gathering that data, maybe that's doing that monitoring of the logs. Maybe I have to send it to an external event hub. Well, I can also configure this rather than going into diagnostic settings per resource. I can go into Azure Monitor and do bulk diagnostic settings configuration, but I could also configure this via Azure Policy. So if you go and look at Azure Policy, you'll see a whole number of different policies just related to diagnostic settings. Turning on a send to a Log Analytics workspace, sending to an event hub, sending to a storage account. So that can be a very powerful solution if I need to do this on a bigger scale. Okay, so we have the resources. We'll realize some resources, they actually have data inside the resource. And we started to look at operating systems for a virtual machine. There's a whole set of different data that I may want to get from inside the VM as well. So if we now think, okay, inside the resource, well, let's think about the guest operating system. So we'll go over to this color now. So within the resource, and there's going to be different types, remember, maybe it's an OS. Now, once again, I could think about for an operating system, there are going to be metrics, but there can also be logs. Maybe it's taking syslog, maybe it's taking some of the event logs from Windows, maybe I'm taking IIS logs. There's different types of logs that I may care about. And so I may want to grab these as well. Now, previously, there were multiple solutions to how we would do this. There was the Log Analytics agent. There was a diagnostics extension, which would take certain data and actually send it into metrics itself. There was Telegraph to get diagnostic information and metrics for Linux. They're still there today, but they're all going away. They're all being collapsed down into a single Azure Monitor agent. So all of this is powered by something called the Azure Monitor agent. Again, today you may still hear about Log Analytics agent. You may hear about Telegraph. You may hear about Diagnostics extension. They're all collapsing into the Azure Monitor agent. Today, there are still some solutions that use the older components, depending on what OS I'm using and where I am in my migration journey. There are things like the dependency agent that used to depend on the Log Analytics agent, but now it's moving to AMA as well. So depending on what I'm trying to do, I may still see those older terms, but realize it's definitely moving to that Azure Monitor agent. And one of the huge benefits of the AMA, and I've got a whole separate video on this, it's not just it collapses it to one agent. Previously, the configuration of these, because I have to think about, well, how do I configure this? How do I tell the agent what to capture, what logs to capture, what metrics you care about? And I had to do this at a workspace before, or I did it via an extension before. It was very messy. Now what we have is these central data collection rules that I define. I tell it what I want data to be collected. I tell it which resources should get this rule, and I'm done. So I have these central data collection rules that power the Azure Monitor agent. And what this will do is, hey, it will then send it, the Azure Monitor agent will send it to a Log Analytics workspace, but it can also send the metrics element as custom metrics to metrics. So there's a custom type of metric as well. So there are ones that are native to the system. Then there's custom where we can add additional time series, so numbers, into the metrics. And we'll see why that's a benefit later on, but it's all about the visibility, but also the speed in which I can react to changes in those numbers and if they're stateful or not. Is it just going to understand, is it triggered some threshold or not? Or is it just going to fire every 5 minutes when I go and check it? So there are some pretty big differences around those. So for the OS, this Azure Monitor Agent works for Windows, it works for Linux, it works for virtual machines, it works for virtual machine scale sets. If I'm using Azure Arc, I can leverage it there as well. And so the whole point of this is it's an extension that will show inside the VM. It uses a component in the VM, but it's going to give me now insight inside that guest operating system as well. And again, we have those data collection rules. Let's see if I can find one super quick. So if we went to just Azure Monitor, what we now see is these nice data collection rules. Now, some of these will just get set up for me. When I turn certain things on, it will just go and create a data collection rule. In case you can see some of these. Hey, VM Insights, it just went and set this up for some of the resources. But here are some ones that I manually configured. So I did one for Linux, I did one for Windows, and you can configure what it is you actually care about. So what are the data sources you want? So notice I could do Windows event logs as well. I could also capture IIS logs. I could capture custom text logs if I've set up a collection endpoint for those. Now, this is because this is set up as a Windows data collection rule. If I was to go and look at a Linux data collection rule, we notice now it shows, hey, Linux syslog instead of those Windows event logs. So I tell it which things I care about. And so for me, I configured some performance counters, but there are basic ones, there are custom ones, so I can add other things I care about. I tell it where I want it to go to. So I set up Azure Monitor Metrics. So it's going to that time series database. And then you target, well, which resources do you want these rules to target? So it's all centrally configured. Then it's just going to go and give me that information into those areas. So this is a really powerful now capability that we have to make sure I'm capturing what I want. And I'm doing it just in one place. I'm not going to a bunch of different log analytics workspaces and trying to find, okay, where was this bit? Where was wherever? And then, well, this goes here, this goes over there. Just a nice central point that I can manage all of that from. Now, operating systems are one type of resource, but there are many, many others. I might also think about, well, there's Kubernetes. So we've got Azure Kubernetes Service. So with Kubernetes, well, there's also different types of collection I might want to do. Now, you'll see things like Container Insights. So with Container Insights, it's using now a pod, which is running an Azure Monitor agent that's going to go and send data to, hey, my log analytics workspace. But Kubernetes is interesting that it also has something called Prometheus. It has these Prometheus metrics. This is a standard. So Prometheus is all about this, I think it's CNCF, standardized set of solutions and ways in which you interact to both scrape the metrics and then show the metrics. There's a whole separate type of query, PromQL. Grafana is a great third party to then visualize this data that it's capturing. So for these Prometheus metrics that we have, there's now a native Azure Prometheus solution. So rather than me having to set up a Prometheus server to go and capture and store these logs, well, I talked about a log analytics workspace. There's a new type called an Azure Monitor workspace. At time of recording, this workspace is only used by Prometheus metrics. So if I configure this for my Kubernetes environment, I create an Azure Monitor workspace. So it's different from a log analytics workspace. It's an Azure Monitor workspace. And then those scraped Prometheus metrics from my Kubernetes will be sent to this Azure Monitor workspace where I can then visualize that. There's also Managed Grafana as a great way to then show that data. Now, one of the really nice things I will say, I'm going to focus on the Kubernetes. You're going to hear me say insights. Insights is all about providing a curated set of workbooks, ways to interact and query the data, dashboards, so ways to view the data, and it will auto-configure the metrics it has to capture and the logs it has to capture. So that I don't really have to maybe even know what I'm doing, but it's going to give me a great starting point to go and see what's going on. Now, one of the challenges in the past is I pay for log analytics, I pay for maybe I should write this in as I'm saying it. So dollars are important. So what I pay for my log analytics workspace, I pay for the data ingested. So I pay for the ingestion, and then I pay for the retention if it goes beyond the default that's included, which I think is normally 30 days. Sometimes if I turn on Sentinel, I'll get 90 days, but I pay for the data ingested. Well, if you consider Kubernetes may have a lot going on. There's the pods, the nodes, the deployments, the services. This is now configurable in two ways. I can configure both the interval. So it used to be every minute. Now it can be between 1 and 30 minutes. And if you think about that logically, if I was capturing data every minute, well, there's X amount of data being ingested that I pay for. If I change that to every 5 minutes, was now a fifth of the data, because it's now only capturing those metrics every 5 minutes. Now, obviously, I lose some fidelity, but it's now a fifth of the data and a fifth of the cost. But I can also control the namespaces. So a namespace is a particular grouping of information about some aspect. Could be pods, could be the nodes, could be the cluster. If there's certain aspects I just don't care about, I can add and remove the namespaces I want. So again, if I took out a whole namespace, that's less data, that's less cost. But then certain dashboards, workbooks won't work because the data it needs to function will not be there anymore. But I get that option for the configuration to control the cost. I can also think, well, there's my custom applications. So hey, I go and have my application that I write. This could be a J2E application. This could be a .NET application. Once again, there are metrics and there are logs. And these are captured through application insights. So I can enable application insights, and then these will actually just go and get collected. And guess where it sends them to? Azure Monitor Logs, that I can then go, and for applications, App Insights adds a lot of value. It goes beyond just, hey, the performance, and if there's a problem, it can give me user experience behavior. There's actually components that can run on the client side as well, or on the web server, to show, well, the users normally take this route through the dialogues. They normally give up here, so I know, hey, I need to give some attention to that component. So there are different aspects of what I can do and configure through that. There is another option. So for log analytics, I can also configure, what color to use for this one? We'll use this one. There is also a REST API. And the REST API essentially means, well, I can send anything. So for the RESTful API, I might have some data that doesn't have an agent, but I want to send that to a log analytics workspace. So I can do that with the REST API. Now, there's actually a way I can send this to metrics as well. So I'm focusing on the logs, but there's also an API to send it to the custom metrics. So I could also send things up to the metrics, Azure Monitor Metrics time series database. But from the logging perspective, the way this is working, it's a HTTP data collector. It's expecting a JSON payload, which will have the data that then will get stored as an entry in a table in my log analytics workspace. Now, if my data isn't JSON, one of the things I could do is, let's say it's CSV or XML, I could write, I don't know, an Azure function, use some serverless technology that would parse the source format, like the XML or the CSV, so it would deserialize it into just a regular object, and then serialize it into JSON, i.e. take the object and convert it into a textual representation, serialize it in JSON, and then I could bring it into my Log Analytics workspace. But also by doing that, maybe I could compress it, I could deduplicate it, whatever I need to do to change how I'm actually ingesting that data into my solution. Now, if I think about this Log Analytics workspace, let's look at these options. Again, storage, cheap. Store it for a long amount of time, but it doesn't give me any way to really interact with it. It's just there. I need to keep it. If I actually had to do something, I'd have to bring it into another solution. Event Hub. This is going to subscribe to a certain topic, and then it's going to get those records. But this stores it and lets me interact. Now, Log Analytics Workspace, when we talk about those retentions, the maximum, so it's configurable. So it has a 2-year maximum, but it is configurable retention. Because remember, I pay on 2 dimensions. I pay, yes, for the data ingested, but then I also pay for the retention once it goes past just the default retention that's included as part of it. So I'd want to be super careful that, hey, I don't just say, yeah, let's keep everything for 2 years. And it's like, why do I have this big bill? Well, it's because I set 2 years retention and I'm paying for that. So once again, it comes back to, I don't monitor things for the sake of monitoring it. Hey, I love monitoring. I monitor because at some point I'm going to want some insight or be able to go back and look at, well, why did I have this problem? Why did I see this thing? So we configure our monitoring to capture the data, and we set the retention for what is the interactions I know I'm going to need to be able to do. How long do I want to be able to go look back in time? That's what I would configure the retention for. So it is important to understand that. Now, because the Log Analytics can get pretty pricey, we want to be really careful with this. There's actually now some options we have around Log Analytics and how it stores the data. So the default, when I just bring data into Log Analytics Workspace, it stores it in something called an analytics log. Now these are the priciest, but it gives me all of the rich KQL, the Kusto query language, the ways I can interact and ask it things. That's how it's stored. So it's stored as an analytics log. But maybe I don't need all of that power. Maybe I don't need to do these fantastic aggregations and these cross-table queries. I just have a fairly basic set of data coming in that I just need to get values from just from within that table. And I want to try and do it much, much cheaper. So there's also now basic logs. Now, basic logs are cheaper, but I pay a small amount of money for when I run a query against it. The types of queries I can run are greatly reduced. There's no summarization. There's no aggregation. Think I'm searching for a particular record. That's really what I'm doing. I'm searching for some particular thing. But these are designed for these very high volume, very verbose logs that I might use for debugging, troubleshooting, auditing. But I'm not using them for bigger analytics. I'm not using them for auditing purposes. I can use these for some of the built-in logs and for my own custom logs. For example, data collection rules, I could use a basic table. So again, they're cheaper is why I would do this, but I lose some capabilities. These get stored for 8 days. It is not configurable. It's 8 days. So okay, so that's limited. So I'll write in limited search. Limited query, that's a better term. Certain built-in tables can use this now. And I talked about container insights earlier. Well, it can actually leverage this. So if we jump over, let's look at one of my Log Analytics workspaces for a second. So if I search for log Analytics, so I've got my workspaces, South Central. And one of the nice things now is if you go to settings, there's actually tables. So I have a little interface to actually go and interact with the schema, see what tables I have. And one of the things you will see here is it will tell you the plan for the table. So plan is the table type. Notice it's also showing me the retention. So this is 90, this is the workspace default. Okay, so 30. And I can go and see these are all analytics tables here. But if I scroll up and look at Container Log V2. So Container Log V2 is the new type of container insights. And if I click the little three dots and manage table, this one will actually let me change it to basic. So I could change the type to basic. So they actually changed Container Insights to now not send the logs cross table. They only send to this single table, which means I don't need cross table queries, which means, hey, basic logs would actually work for what I need. So I could go and change now this to basic. And notice it's saying interactive retention is hard coded to 8 days. It can't be less, it can't be more. It is 8 days. But also notice there's this, well, the total retention period is configurable and it's set to 30. So it's showing me, well, there's this archive period of 22 days. And if I change the total retention period to longer, just that archive period is going to go up. So I'll close out that. And you'll see this for all of them. So even the ones that are analytics, if I manage the table, I could change the total retention period to longer. And then we see this archival period go up. So what's going on here? So the whole idea of this is, once again, how can I control my cost a bit more? So the analytics logs and the basic logs I can interact with. Analytics logs, full interaction. Basic logs, little bit of interaction just within the table. But then maybe there's times that I need to just keep it for longer. Again, because those may be regulatory requirements. I don't anticipate having to interact with it, or maybe it'll be very rarely, but I need to keep it. So then we also now have the option to have archive logs. And as you saw, what happens here is I set a retention period for the analytics or the basic log. And then the total time I say I want to keep it for, the additional time, it goes and writes it to archive logs. Now I cannot query this directly. It's cheaper, but I can't query it. If I then want to query data from archive logs, I have to do one of two things. So to actually then interact, I need to, so many colors. So to get it back and doing something useful, I can either perform a search job. So there's this particular search job. And what this will do is it will run here and it will bring the data back into a new table in my analytics table. I think it has underscore SRCH to show you, hey, it's a search result. Yeah, underscore SRCH table will be created here. Or I can do a restore. Hey, just restore this set of data from archive logs. And that will create a underscore RST table in the analytics log. So I have to pay for that. And I have to pay for the data to be brought back as well. So there's costs associated with interacting and bringing things back from the archive logs. But hey, if I don't really anticipate it, but I need to keep it for 7 years, this is a very attractive option because this can actually be retained for up to 7 years. 7 years is a popular number in banking. Have to keep this for 7 years all over the place. Now that search job I talked about, I can actually run against basic logs as well. So I might sometimes need to bring things back into my analytics. So I can also run that search job against basic. I don't have to if it's just a simple query. Remember, I can run limited queries directly against the basic logs and just get the results. But if I had to perform some richer type of search, I can run a search job against basics and those results would then get stored in my analytics log. So that is available to me. So those are some of the real key types of interactions that we'll see. And what that's really doing is getting that data into either the Azure Monitor Metrics time series database, or primarily for interactions we want to do, the Log Analytics workspace. But hey, I could also send it to an Event Hub or storage. One thing I'll finish with on this picture is some solutions, as you saw, don't use diagnostic settings. They just send it directly to a Log Analytics workspace. Well, what if in those scenarios, I actually wanted the data in Event Hub? I wanted to send it to an external solution, or I just wanted to store it in storage. There's two different things I could do. So there's a capability to export. I can set up an export job from my Log Analytics workspace at a table level. So if I set this up, what it's going to do is everything in a particular table. So it's at a table level. There's no filtering, it will be everything. So I can set up an export and it will send it to Event Hub or storage account. So every single record in the table that I set this up for, it will send it. It's pretty much in real time. I think there's 5-minute increments in the files it creates in the storage account, but this will just push it to the Event Hub. If I want to actually filter it, well, then I could write something. So for example, I could write a logic app, some serverless function. Then I could define what records I want to take. And then, hey, from here, I could send it to there, or I could send it to a storage account. So built in, no filtering, everything in the table that I set up the export for. Or if I want to only send certain things, hey, write some serverless, could be a logic app, could be Azure function, and then it will be responsible for actually then sending that on. So I have those choices. But we have those 3 core things built in to send data. Okay. So what do we actually do with the data? So we might visualize it. One of the common things we want to do is we're sending it because we want some way to see the data in the environment. So I'm thinking of dashboards. So I could think about, well, okay, we've got this over here. I want to create some dashboards. I want to create a workbook. Maybe I want some ability to actually share it with people. Maybe I want to do some deeper analysis of the various issues. But maybe I also want to be able to react. Hey, there's a certain log has come in, which is a bad sign. Maybe the metrics has gone past some threshold I'm comfortable with. Hey, I need to alert something that's busier than it should be. So there's different things I might need to do. And there's different solutions for all of these different aspects, as you can imagine. So if I think for a second about those options, so I'm going to, I guess, draw back. So hey, we had the storage, we had the Event Hub, we had Log Analytics workspace. But remember, we also had this Azure Monitor Metrics time series database that was just native to the platform. So if we take a step back and let's draw out those things. So we had the activity log of the subscription, which also, remember, includes the service health. We had the time series metrics. And then I can also think about, I'm going to draw it over here so I can fit things in. We had the Azure Monitor logs. So I'm just going to write logs, but that's a Log Analytics workspace. And those logs are broken down into separate tables, which are particular aspects, different namespaces for different types of service that we're leveraging. So in terms of, hey, I want information, I want to know what's going on in the system, I want to be able to visualize things. Well, the first place we might just go is from all of these, I could create a dashboard. A dashboard actually is great that, well, I can take all of these insights into here. So from a dashboard, I could read in things, obviously metrics can be fed into here. I can feed in data from Log Analytics Workspace, so I'm writing KQL queries that will then give me some set of results that I can show in here. I can get things from my activity log. And then I could have bits of data. I can get little pictures. I could have some chart. I can also bring in information from the resource graph. So the resource graph, and we'll talk about this in the final part of the masterclass, but it's a way to interact at huge scale with information about the resources in my environment. So rather than having to talk to the ARM API and say, hey, list out the VMs, I can use a KQL query and say, hey, select from VMs. And it's really, really fast, and it doesn't go against my quota of the interactions I can have with the REST API. So it's really fast, it's really huge scale it supports. I could also run queries against the Azure Resource Manager. So the regular ARM API, maybe there's things I want to know about in here. And one of the nice things about dashboards is, well, I can pin elements of things I look at very easily to a dashboard. And dashboards are very easy to share with other people. So I can go and create a dashboard, and let's actually go and look at a dashboard. So I can pin from activity logs. If we just go, well, this is the home screen, but then we've got this little dashboard icon here. And I might think about creating dashboards for different workloads. So I can create lots of dashboards. Notice there's an Azure AD Audit dashboard, an Azure AD Sign-in dashboard. I might create one for my application A, which has things pinned from its load balancer and its database and its virtual machines. Whatever is applicable to this single pane of glass. This is what it's really designed around. I've got a single pane of glass that I want to show things for. So that's what I think about as a dashboard. But I can pin things from the activity log, from metrics. If we edit, notice there's a gallery. So look, I can add a metrics chart. I can add a resource group. I could add a clock. I can add markdown language. I could add Azure AD tasks, app map security metrics, resource graph, single value tile, availability tests, videos, ARM data, resource graph, ARM actions, so it could actually do things. But most of the times when you're looking at some resource, actually let's just cancel this, but notice I could rearrange, I could put anything I want in here. If I was just looking at, let's say, a VM for a second, looking at some aspect of it, so actually it's just monitoring. Notice this pin icon. If I select the pin icon, it'll ask me which dashboard do I want to pin this to. I could create a new one. So it's super easy to go and see things I care about and then go and add it to the dashboard. So dashboard is really powerful. Then we also have the idea of a workbook. So if we scroll down, so this is obviously just a regular Azure Monitor. We have these insights, but then we have workbooks. There's a lot of workbooks just built in. Now, the point of a workbook is this is a document-like flow. It's a collaborative authoring experience. It's interactive reporting. If I select some element of the workbook, it will update other elements in the workbook. So it's a very different type solution. And let's actually go and look. These are all of the workbooks, kind of that are native. But if I was to look at a VM, for example, let's go over here, look at my virtual machines. If I selected a VM, there's actually two things I could look at here. Firstly, it will show me workbooks relevant to a VM. So here, look, there's a VM metrics workbook. And you can see it's showing me information. But one of the things I can do here, hey, look, there's alerts. But I can edit the workbook. I could go and add my own things. I could edit the things that are built in. I have a lot of control over this. So I can add components to it. So if I look at this add at the bottom, I can add text, parameters, queries, metrics, create a new group of information. So Workbook is saying, hey, that I want to actually interact and maybe get a richer set of data from this particular solution. There's also things like Grafana. So I mentioned before, so we have dashboards. So think single pane of glass. I have workbooks, which are more interactive investigation to what I'm doing. And this will really come from, I can create them from scratch, or there's a lot of templates built in that I can use. And then even those templates, I can fully customize. There's also things like Grafana. Grafana is very popular, especially with containers. There's a metrics, so an Azure Monitor metrics plugin is available. So from Grafana, I can now easily show the data that's in that Azure Monitor metrics database. But again, it works super powerful with Prometheus for my containers to visualize all of that all-up data. And solutions like Power BI. Power BI is a very rich solution for analyzing and showing data. Well, I could use Power BI with all of these as well. So there's a lot of solutions available to me. But you may wonder, well, how do I get started? Well, you saw me say insights a few times. So the recommendation is to start with insights. Now, what insights is doing is it's pulling data from the activity log, from metrics, and log analytics. Now, what this means is when I turn insights on for a resource, it's going to set up those diagnostic settings and send things to a log analytics workspace, which means I'm going to pay for that log analytics workspace data. So you want to be careful, but it gives you a huge amount of great insight. Now, remember, things like containers, I can change it to the basic type table because it all writes to one table, so that would save me money. But I can also now configure that interval of how often it sends it, and I can also exclude certain namespaces. But the huge benefit of this is it's curated. It's curated and designed by the people that create the resource. So Azure Kubernetes Service, for example, they created Container Insights. Now it does also provide workbooks. So it's going to give me these nice visualizations, but then there are workbooks that I could go and customize. And there's insights for all of the key types of resource. So if we jump over again, if I just looked at my virtual machine, I turned insights on for this VM. And if I select insights, well, I can see performance information. So I can see logical disk performance. So logical disk is getting that from within the guest operating system. Hey, I can see CPU utilization, available memory, logical disk IOPS, logical disk megabytes per second. Lots of very, very nice information. I can also go and look at a map. So this would actually go and show me, oh, I've not got this turned on. This would actually show me connections it's doing to other types of resource. And if I went back to Azure Monitor, notice all the different categories of insights it has over here. So applications, VMs, storage accounts, containers, networks, SQL, Cosmos DB, Key Vault. I mean, the list goes on. It has these massive amounts of information. I don't actually know what other resources I have turned on for insights. Oh, okay. So my Cosmos DB. So for my Cosmos DB, hey, look, an overview page. Okay, I can get some basic information. But then I would see information about the throughput, the request, the storage, the availability, the latency, and it has workbooks. So I could then take that insight and take it to another level. And the key part of a workbook, especially when it's talking to a log analytics workspace, if I edit it, so I can see these different aspects of what it's showing me here. But depending on the type of way it's working, where it's getting the data from, we've got throughput, for example, what I'll get for some of them is I could actually see the query of what it's doing. So when I'm actually editing the component, edit. So here I'm editing this particular one. I can see where it's getting the data from. But I'm trying to think where this is here. The advanced editor. I would be able to see the Kusto query language query it's actually using to get the data. So if there was some really nice insight you're seeing and it's using Log Analytics Workspace as part of the editing, I would see the Kusto query language that it's using to get that data. So it's a nice way to learn some of the Kusto query language and get those capabilities for myself. So you can play around with the workbooks and get some nice insight. Now, in addition, to start with insights, obviously once it's in Azure Monitor Logs, I can absolutely, just at my machine, I can use KQL. I can use it for my application, I can use it for other things. I can go and get nice information about what's happening in the environment. But the chances are, I want to know when there are issues. I want to know if there's a problem going on in the environment. And so we have these different sources of information. Hey, there's the activity log, there's metrics, and there's logs. They're the real key input points if I want to know about something. And there's different types of things I need to know. A counter has gone over a certain value. My CPU is over 90%. There's also going to be, hey, I'm seeing throttling logs. I want to know about those. Or if I get more than 3 logs in 5 minutes, I want to know about those. And so if I think about something telling me, I need alerting. So the way we do alerting is we create alert rules. Now, alert rule can take in events from the activity log, which includes the service health. It can take in metrics. Now, metrics are a little bit special here. We call them a fast metric pipeline. Now, it's really a fancy way of saying when some metric happens, we can respond typically less than 60 seconds. So it's a fast interaction. But I can also interact with logs. Now, the interaction with logs would normally not be metrics. Metrics is far faster. The only reason I would use metrics against Log Analytics table would be maybe it's some really complex set of queries I'm doing, but it's really not typical. What's going to be more typical here is I'm running a log query, and I'm interested in one of two things. I'm interested in the result value, or I'm interested in the number of results. i.e. result value would be, find me the log. Okay, I've got the log. What does the log say? Or, hey, did I get any matches? And if I did, how many? Hey, I got 3 threshold error messages in 5 minutes. Okay, I've broke 3. I need to be told about that fact. Now, a huge thing about the log queries is they are interval based. So I'm telling it, hey, run this over this time period. They are not stateful. And what I mean by that is if I run the query and it found me 3 records and it's going to fire off an alert, if I run the query again 10 minutes later and that's still within the time range, it will fire again. So I'll just constantly keep getting this alerting. Whereas when I'm using something like the metrics, these are stateful. So hey, it's flipped. It's gone past this. It won't just keep alerting me to that fact. Now, one of the nice things I can do, because of the benefit of the metrics, I can take time series data that maybe was only sent to the log tables. I couldn't send it to metrics, although that's getting less and less these days. But I can send data from a log table to the Azure Monitor Metrics as custom data. So I can have a scheduled query rule. And that scheduled query rule will take time series, i.e. numbers, from Log Analytics and send it as custom metrics, which I could then use the metric type of input into the alert rule, which then would be stateful. I would get that maybe the faster metric pipeline. So there's benefits to this, whereas there's a lag. I mean, there's lags involved with log tables anyway, but this will have some nice capabilities to bring that in and get that stateful benefit. So different ways I can come into the rules. So if I was to jump over, and we could start looking at building one of these. So if I look at Azure Monitor, and I go to alerts. Now I'm building this from scratch. If you were to go and look at, let's say, let's look at VM. I can build alerts for this particular resource directly here. And for some of them now, it will even recommend alerts. So notice it's saying, hey, do you want to turn on some recommended alert rules? Or I could just create a regular one. If I enable the recommended, it will show me ones that it thinks we should care about. And I can just click enable. And it's just going to send an email basically. But I could configure some other things or use an action group, which we're going to see. And it's telling me, hey, it's going to cost you some money. You pay for each of these ones, but it's basically 10 cents an alert when it's a time series metric. So hey, there's 7 of these it's going to add. It's going to cost me 70 cents a month. So I could just turn them all on there. Or I can more centrally, maybe at a broader level, I want to turn on some alerting. So when I go and create a brand new alert, so I create an alert rule, well, I can tell it, well, what are the types of resource I care about? And I can drill down. Now I might say I want to do it about virtual machines. So I could drop down to here and just select virtual machines. And it would show me the resource groups that have virtual machines. Where do I have? I could select all of them, for example. So I noticed there were 2. That's kind of weird. There we go. It's not updating very well. Come on. Is it in here? Nope. So if I just search for demo. It's kind of weird, there's 2 in here. There we go. It's the first virtual machines. So if I select, I could select multiple. I could select it at the subscription level, so I could cover multiple resources. But if I just select demo VM, for example, and then what is my condition? So we have signal types. Now, we can see here we have the activity log. We have resource health. We have metrics. And then we have the log. So we have those key types we talked about. Which ones are available will depend on the type of resource. But if, for example, right now it's showing me all of them. So I could do a custom log search, which is obviously going to be of type log search. Resource health would obviously be resource health. And then metrics, metrics is actually most of them. So if we look at all the different metrics, again, we could search. But if I search for percentage CPU. Now, one of the things to look at here, because it's a time series type, so it's a number, I pick a threshold of when I want it to alert me. So it's the average, maximum, minimum, total. How often am I checking? How far do I look back? I have all these configurations. And I could set an absolute number. So I might say, hey, if it's higher than 80%. And it's showing me, well, historically where I am, and then where my threshold I've configured. Or I can use machine learning. If I hit dynamic, I don't enter a value anymore. Instead, I tell it how aggressive do I want to be. So I could say high sensitivity, which means it's going to alert me earlier if it's just even slightly outside the norm. Low, hey, I only care if it's like wildly outside what you typically see. Or I could set as medium. So you have these different options to configure. And it's telling me the cost. So to use the dynamic, it costs a little bit more because it's obviously using that machine learning to go and see what's normal in my environment. But I go and set up this alert rule. And if I look at the advanced options, hey, I can set additional numbers of violations. And the key part here is I'm going to skip actions. Now notice there is an actions ability. I don't want to set that here. Instead, under details, I can set a severity, which is important, a rule name, and a rule description. And again, there's a few things to enable upon creation, automatically resolve alerts, solved. And there I'm setting up the alert rule. So what this would essentially do at this point is fire an alert. So I've created the alert rule based on these things, and the output of that is going to be, okay, create an alert. So it's fired, there's been an event, alerts are always red, so we're going to have alert. Attention over here. And it has things like that severity. And obviously the resource it's impacting, etc. Now those alerts, so that alert rule is going to drive the alert. This would show up in, for example, there's a dashboard. So these will show up as a list on my dashboard. There's a built-in just alert screen. I could pin it to my own custom dashboards. I can feed this into other things to go and trigger something else, as we're going to see, but it's just going to show up as an alert. Okay. Now, one of the things it will also do when I'm thinking about these dashboards and displaying the alerts, it does have smart groups. And what smart groups mean is if there's like lots of alerts have got fired, all about the same type of alert, the same resource, rather than showing me 50 alerts, it will understand they're really about the same thing and it will group them together. So that helps me solve that problem. Okay, so this is alerted, but now I actually want to do something. Well, to do something, what we're going to create is something called an action group. So the next component then is an action group. An action group, as the name suggests, does stuff. So this could send an SMS message, it could email, it could interact with an ITSM, so a service management solution, it could call an Azure function. So it's saying serverless, which would then go and do anything you wanted at all. It could go and write to Event Hub because some other service is subscribed and would see that. I could call a webhook, so some RESTful API that could do anything. There's Azure automations. There's a whole bunch of stuff it can do. So if we jump over and go and look at those. So firstly, I've got my alert rules. So I've got a whole bunch of different ones detecting different things. But then if I go back and now look at action groups, well, these are combinations of things I want to do. If I do create, I have to give it a resource group. There's notifications. So, hey, I can email the ARM manager role or particular people I specify. So if I select the second one, hey, who do I want to email? Who do I want to send an SMS to? Who do I want to ping their Azure mobile app on? Who do I want to call? Obviously, calling is fairly aggressive. I can do any of those I want and or actions. So call an automation run book, call an Azure function, call Event Hub, call ITSM, call a Logic app, call a secure webhook, call a webhook. So I create these action groups, which are just combinations of actions. That's a fairly easy thing. Now, one of the things you saw was that when I was creating the alert rule, I did have the ability to not only generate the alert, but I could also specify an action group. It does let me do that. The challenge with that is I'm then defining the relationships between every single alert I create, which if I then want to change it is cumbersome to do later on. So we have something that can sit in between. In between these, I can create something called alert processing rules. And what's nice about this is triggering from the alerts, but I can assign at certain scopes. So, hey, this particular alert processing rule only applies to alerts that for resources in this resource group. I can also add filters. Hey, it only applies for resources in this resource group if the severity is high. And then it can call the action group. So I'm now splitting apart what generates the alert from then what should happen based on different types of alert. But in addition to calling it, or I can actually suppress. And you might be saying, well, what does that mean? So normally an action group would have got fired by maybe some other alert processing rule, or because I had this direct link. But maybe there are some scenarios I don't want it to fire. Maybe there's some one-time event. Do you know, it's Christmas Day. Normally I get alerted if there's just a warning. It's Christmas Day, I just don't care. If it's critical, sure, you can bother me on Christmas Day. Otherwise, I don't want to know. So I can have one-time special events, or I can actually set these up as recurring. Because I might think, or maybe there's maintenance windows. So I know at certain times, so I might, again, maintenance window would be common use for this. I know I'm going to get alerts when I'm doing my maintenance. I don't want them. So I might say, hey, suppress certain types of actions that would have happened in these times using an alert processing rule. So it's about, hey, alert rule fires the alert of certain categories, severities. Then alert processing rules will look at the alerts that have been generated and decide what to do based on scope and filters. And then it can call an action group to do something, or even say, hey, I want to suppress certain things for certain time periods because there are other things going on right now. And so if we go and look at one of these, so I've got my action groups, but then I can also look at the alert processing rules. And we can see I've got two. So I've got one for, well, look, if it's this if it's this resource group and the severity is 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, then it's running an action group. So I didn't have to have anything defined. There could be loads of different types of alert rules that would generate these severities for resources in this resource group. But I have a resource group owner. They're the ones that should get notified for anything in the resource group. Then I also created one where its filter is for the whole subscription, and it's saying, look, anything that's just a severity 4, suppress it. I don't want that to fire. So whereas normally it would have emailed me, this would override it, and it will not. And I've got a whole separate video about these, but this is really nice. When you create one of these, you can tell it whatever the scope is. And in your rule settings, you're telling it, hey, are you suppressing or do you want to do something? And I can go and set up all of the other details for that. So those are all of the components that we have. And this is key. Like, you want to spend a bit of time getting these set up, because now it will alert you when there's something going on in the environment, as opposed to me having to try and trawl through and understand what's going on, and it might take me time. Let it do the hard work for me. So this is a really important set of work to get done. And you can see there's an entire flow. So I have to make sure I've got the right configurations to capture the data into the systems. And then I go and set up the alerting around that data. Now, if it's Azure Monitor Metrics, that's just there by default. So I can do, if it's just number-based, that's almost out of the box. And it's even recommending alerts for lots of types of resources that you should turn on. But for some of those richer behaviors, hey, I need to get diagnostic settings to send it to a log analytics workspace, and then I can do queries and results against that. Again, there's going to be a little bit of a lag because there's an ingestion time to get things into log analytics workspace. Metrics is much, much faster. because it's got that fast metrics pipeline. So that's a big chunk of the monitoring, and I could spend a lot more time talking about monitoring, but hey, there's only so many hours in the day. I need to take my kids bowling today. So then we can start to think about security. So from a security perspective, we have to be preemptive. We can't wait for the bad thing to happen. We want to think ahead of how do I minimize my attack surface? How do I make sure I have good visibility into my environment? So there are some core rules which I'm about to talk about. Make things only have what they absolutely need, only when they absolutely need them. So you'll hear about just enough administration, just the permissions you need, just in time. Only have those permissions when you need it. You have to elevate up to get them. Things like permissions management, things like privileged identity management help do that just in time. Make sure you're patched. Make sure you have anti-malware. Make sure you have firewalls. Make sure you're restricting the type of traffic. Like good hygiene. So you want to minimize your responsibilities. Like PAS, you're not patching the OS. You're not doing the firewall for the OS. So if I can use PAS, there's less I'm responsible for. But good security hygiene will solve a lot of the problems ahead of time. Get that right first. If you think about making sure your operating system is patched, that seems stupidly obvious, but unfortunately it's ignored a lot of the time. Like that hygiene is critical. So if I was to think, actually I'll leave it red. So if I think the security, we think about lots of advanced solutions and fantastic dashboards. Do you know, if I can just have good hygiene, it's like 90% of the battle. Like patching is so obvious, but some companies don't do it. If there's a critical patch released, I should be thinking about less than 1 week to get that rolled out. Some of the big attacks, I think it was like the WannaCry, there'd been a patch out for a long time. Companies hadn't deployed it. If it's non-critical, 1 month. Now you might say, why am I saying a week? Why not a day? I still want to go through a good, safe deployment practice. There could be something in that fix that breaks my application. I'm not just going to push it out to everything. I still want to go through the idea of piloting and then a gradual rollout to make sure if there was some impact, I know about it and don't take down my company. But it needs to be accelerated. This should not be waiting a month. If there's a critical thing, get it out there. Protect your environment. Make sure you're encrypting stuff. Encrypting stuff at rest. So hey, my laptops have got BitLocker on them. In Azure, all of your resources are encrypted anyway. Maybe I want to control that encryption with a customer managed key, bring my own key in my key vault. In transit, so make sure you've got TLS turned on. I can use things like Azure Policy for storage account to say I can only support encrypted communications. Make sure you're doing just enough administration and just in time. Don't give people a whole bunch of high privileges. Make sure you're using things like MFA or even better, passwordless. Just get the basics right. And we also think, when I think security, there's a whole shift left. What that means is I'm introducing security as early as possible. I don't think, hey, I've deployed my app, now I should put a firewall in front of it. As I'm developing my code, as I'm checking code in, maybe there are solutions that are checking the dependencies. Hey, you're using a dependency that has a vulnerability. Here's a pull request to use a dependency that's got that issue resolved. Maybe I'm converting my code to data to go and look for things I'm doing that would introduce some attack point to me. As I go through my creating a container image, well, that image is scanned for vulnerabilities and it's re-scanned for vulnerabilities because new vulnerabilities get found. As I'm pushing out my code to a test environment, there are tests performed against the environment to make sure I've got good configurations. I'm using good templates to make sure I have firewalls turned on. I'm using policy to enforce those things. security, security, security. I'm thinking layers of protection. Yes, the OS has a firewall, but I'm also putting a web application firewall in front of my app gateway or my Azure front door. I've got distributed denial of service protection in my environment. So I think all these layers of protection all of the time, but I don't think security at the end. It's introduced all the way at the start. So I bring it in as early as I possibly can. Now, obviously a huge part of what we just talked about, monitoring. If I'm not paying attention, if I don't have good observability into the environment, it's very, very hard to know if there's a problem. And then obviously, yes, we do think about threat protection. Because there are still advanced attackers out there that even if I have good hygiene, there were maybe some attack surface left over. I still need protection from different types of threat. All the great policies in the world, someone brings that USB key in and just plugs it in or does something silly. Hey, now it's doing this lateral movement. But I can minimize that if I have a lot of these other good hygiene. If I have this just enough, if I limit the network communications to only the required ports that have to be there, there are still things I can do to minimize that attack surface. So shift left on security. And then we have to monitor, we have to apply those different intelligent solutions. So I do want to bring up the term zero trust. We always, that should be we always talk about layers of protection. But zero trust focuses on 3 key tenets. Now we still want all those different layers. I still think about identity is critical and yes, all my different perimeter networks and my resources and everything is still layers of security. We have that onion. But zero trust is these 3 tenets. And it's really about verify explicitly, use least privilege, and assume breach. We have these 3 things. So I think this is critical enough. I actually want to draw this out. So we think, I'm doing red again. Zero trust. So we verify. We never assume, hey, because you're on this network, you're good to go. Every aspect of every interaction, we constantly revalidate the identity. Could be a user, could be a service principal, a machine, everything. This includes the device. If I'm connected from a device, what is the health of that device? Maybe if it's a user's personal device, we're doing application level management and the application is in its own sandbox and the security of that. Are we within certain policies? I think about least privilege. Now there are many dimensions to least privilege, but this helps me reduce lateral movement. An attacker will get on a machine and then they will look for some credential or something else. They can move laterally to other machines which have some other credential and then move. They want to move around. So the lower the permissions that some resource has, the harder it is to do some of that movement and elevate up. The whole point is to get into an environment and elevate up my permissions till I'm a domain admin, and then I can do anything I want. Over time, most people accumulate permissions because they go from project to project to project. So I want to think about good lifecycle management. I want to think about access reviews. Do you still need these permissions? Should you still be in this group? Should you still have this role? Think least privilege. So I think this micro segmentation of communications. I can only talk to this machine and this machine on this port. So this is not just least privilege in terms of users, but this could also be around network. And actually, I don't like even just users. It could be users, application identities, managed identities, service principals, the network, only having the ports open that I actually need to do the job. I want good controls and policy on everything that I have. And just assume breach. There used to be a joke about there was it 2 types of companies, those that have been breached and those that don't know they've been breached. Like just assume you have been breached. So what this means is I need that monitoring. I need constant signals coming in. So I want signals, telemetry constantly coming in. Because what I want to be able to do is to constantly make decisions. And those decisions, well, they're going to come from having policy defined. So this could be things like conditional access. So in an Azure AD world, I use conditional access to look at different aspects, the user's risk, the service principal's risk, the type of resource they're trying to access, how strong was the authentication coming in. And then based on that decision, we're then going to enforce some type of access to that, and we're constantly monitoring to bring signals back in. So we don't trust anything. We assume there's been a breach. We want constant signals from every aspect of our environment: the network, the devices, the resources, the users, the internet, looking for known bad things. We want all these telemetry and signals coming in. So the more signals we have, the more intelligence we have, the better the decisions we can make. And that's a key part to this. And we keep that idea of that least privilege. We're constantly reevaluating, well, what do you really need? And that's what you can have, but you don't need anything beyond what you need to do your job at this particular moment in time. So this is a key tenet to everything we're going to do. So now I want to talk about how we implement some of this, and specifically Microsoft Defender for Cloud, or Microsoft Defender for, as we'll see, is the answer. So there's a basic. There is a basic offering that's completely free. It works cross-cloud. So Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Platform hybrid. This is giving me cloud security and posture management. It really services this in a nice way through something called the Secure Score. Now, if I look at this, let's jump over to here. This shows me the plan options. And the key part is there's both a free and then there's a Defender CSPM plan. And we're looking at the free option right now. We're looking at this. But notice even the free, Azure, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, and on-premises, so hybrid. Now, if it's not Azure, it's focusing on using the Azure Arc agent to actually get the information so it can drive and make these recommendations. But the whole point of this being free, and let's look at the free one for a second. So if I go to my Defender, so straight away I've got a security posture. I do not have a paid plan, but it's showing me, okay, some recommendations, my regulatory requirements, offerings, workload protections, inventory. But if I go and look around, there's recommendations. So I have a secure score. My secure score is not very good, 34%. And based on that secure score, it's giving me things I could do that would have the biggest potential impact on my score. So hey, enable MFA, secure management, remediate vulnerabilities. So if I'm starting off, I could come and look at my secure score, and then I could go, okay, well, these are the things that give me the highest improvement to my score. So these are the things I should probably start with. So, Defender for Cloud. If you've been around for a long time, this was Azure Security Center before, but now it's Defender for Cloud, because as you saw, it's not Azure. Yes, it's Azure as well, but it's also way beyond that. So we have this nice basic option, which is free. But even though it's free, it's giving us that cloud security posture management. And it's a huge driver for this is it's being driven by Azure Policy. So behind the scenes, it creates an initiative using Azure Policy. And we saw that when we talked about helping map our compliance and governance solution. So this is being powered by Azure Policy. So it's creating a whole bunch of policies, wrapping them up in an initiative and using it, which is why we need Azure Arc if it's not Azure, so it gives us something to use those policies. There's also some agentless capabilities, but this is powered by Azure Policy. And as we talked about, yes, it runs absolutely on Azure, but it also runs, I was going to draw the others in a different color, but that's kind of petty. but also on Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud Platform, and I guess hybrid, I should draw in a different color, and hybrid. So this could be outside of a cloud platform. And once again, these are powered by Arc. If it's not Azure, it's Arc driven. So it uses that Arc capability. I have the Arc agent installed. That then enables policy to be used, which can then gather the signals to make these recommendations. And you might actually wonder, why is this free? Like, why would they give this away for free? This cloud security posture management piece, that's that security hygiene. And once again, if you get that right, you're so far down the path to be successful. So they're giving it away free because in a lot of ways, this is the most important bit. Get this right, you're defeating a lot of the bad stuff out there. So they give this away free to try and get you in as good a possible place you can be. So just without spending any money, I want to go through that secure score. I want to go through the recommendations. I can connect to my other clouds, get the information in and try and at least get a good security hygiene perspective. Follow the recommendations, get my secure score up, and I'm in a much, much better place. But then obviously there is an enhanced version. So if we look at the enhanced, this I pay for. So it talks about the enhanced features. So basic, as we talked about, is that cloud solution posture management. Then enhanced, well, it's actually interesting because when I get to the enhanced side, there's different aspects to it. So I can enable this Defender CSPM plan. That's going to give me far more industry standards, more regulatory compliance offerings out there. There's things like the Cloud Security Explorer that lets me run queries against the graph. So I could see these plans. So if I was to look, for example, at my environmental settings, I could, well, actually there's two things I'll show here. Firstly, if I just select a management group for a second, it'll show me I could go and enable more standards. So I can turn on all these other regulatory requirements that I might need to adhere to. And once again, these are going to use policy, huge, massive initiatives that it's scanning many, many different things to enable these to work. ISO 27001, HIPAA, HITRUST. So I'll go and turn these on. But then within a particular subscription, this is where I can turn on the Defender plan. So here I could go and turn on CSPM. So I've got CSPM free right now, but then there's actually Defender CSPM. Now notice, I think pretty much all of them have a free trial. So I think you can try them free for 30 days, but you'll see there are, well, Defender for servers, Defender for app service, Defender for databases, and there's different types of database. There's SQL, there's Cosmos, there's Postgres, storage, containers, Key Vault, ARM, DNS. So I can pick the ones that I want to enable based on the types of resource I actually have. So depending on which ones I turn on here, that's going to influence which services. So there's Defender CSPM, which gives me that richer set of capabilities around different regulatory requirements, that Explorer. There's an attack path analysis tool. But I'll also then see Defender for blank. And we saw there a huge number of those solutions. So if we have the free version, then we also then have the enhanced. Now obviously the enhanced, I pay money for, but that gives me those additional regulatory capabilities that I need to track against. There's that Explorer to go and run queries against my overall security status. There's monitoring of attack paths. There's different types of workload protections. So then, that was Defender for Cloud. Then we have, let's change my color. Defender for pretty much everything. There are things like servers. Defender for servers. Defender for servers introduces things like just-in-time protection, where it will only open up a port, be it RDP or SSH or WinRM, for a time window of when I need it. It's going to add things like app controls, dynamic app controls. These are the apps we typically see. We'll whitelist these. We'll stop other ones. Network hardening. There's a whole list of things that I get. There are ones around containers, for example. And the key point, all of these are threat protections. And the point is that they have different capabilities based on the type of resource and the things we would care about and be attacked about for those types of resource. So containers, well, hey, I'm going to look for vulnerabilities in the Kubernetes environment, but I'm also going to go and scan the registries where I have my images and look inside the images and are there vulnerabilities, are there problems inside those? And there's just a massive number of these solutions. I think I linked to it from there. So how does it collect the data? But if I looked on this left side, so Defender for servers, different capabilities, assessments, Defender for containers, database protections, and there's SQL, there's open source like Postgres in there, there's Cosmos DB, app services, storage, Key Vault, ARM, DNS, Defender for DevOps. So we think about shifting left, that helps us do that huge shift left. So these are the things that, hey, I'm using Azure. Security always kind of gets pushed to the side until there's a problem. And then it's, oh, what do we do? What do we do? Where did this attack come from? So yes, security hygiene is huge and very, very important, but it's critical to understand what are the resources I have. And yes, get that fantastic hygiene in place. That's going to stop most attackers. You're not being targeted by some expert in a room with a ton of monitors or some state attack. It's a script kiddie that downloaded this script and they're looking for easy things. That good hygiene will protect you from that. Now, again, the targeted attacks, that's when I need more than that. The script kiddies will probably get beaten by this part, but when you start getting into the more targeted attacks, I need monitoring, I need the threat protection. So I need to have these things in my company, and the best type of threat protection is not really some generic solution. It knows what to look at and what is the possible types of attack surface for different types of service. So servers, containers, DNS, ARM as a control plane, databases, Key Vault. Let's look for the signals and understand the signals that are most pertinent to that type of resource to help me have the best threat protection from those. So that's what all those Defender solutions are giving me. And then there's Azure Sentinel. So Azure Sentinel is there to help ingest data, so get all of those signals in from all of the different types of signal systems, then add intelligence on top of it. So help give me good alerting, help create incidents based on what it's seeing. So Sentinel is both a SIEM and a SOAR. So a SIEM is just a security incident and event management tool. Hey, I'm detecting there's something happening. I'm helping you manage and investigate that event. A SOAR is about security orchestration automated response, i.e. let's do something. Don't just tell me, help me do something to automatically, don't wait for me to see it, let's do some things. It also has extended detection and response, XDR type capabilities. So the whole goal of Sentinel is it's built on Log Analytics Workspace. So it's going to bring in, it uses the native Log Analytics Workspace connectors, but it also adds a whole number of its own. So it goes beyond what Log Analytics Workspace can do in terms of getting data from different types of systems. So it has those additional connectors. It has ways I can alert, but it also has ways I can go and hunt. So look for signs of problems, playbooks to actually automatically respond, notebooks for deeper investigation into problems. Use Jupyter Notebooks, so it's using those capabilities to go and scan and look around to find the problems. Just regular workbooks for more standardized basic viewing of what's going on. So it has all these capabilities, but it has that automation. And there's automation through playbooks, which are built on logic apps. But it also now has, maybe it's some simpler thing I'm doing. I don't want to have to create a whole logic app. There are some basic things it just has built into it. So if I think about Azure Sentinel, so I can get the universe color as well. So we have Sentinel. It's built on top of Azure Monitor Logs or Log Analytics Workspace. But the whole point here is, yes, there are connectors that was just native Log Analytics Workspace, but there's also additional connectors that's now coming in with this as well. So I can get data from just huge different types of systems. My network devices, yes, things like syslog, that goes without saying, but just massive types of ingestion from all these different things. And then what it's applying on top of this is things like machine learning. So it's not just running some basic rule, it's learning what we normally see and feeds it back in to then go and create, hey, those incidents. Enable me to do that hunting and all those other things. So it's sitting on top of this. And so if we go and look just super quickly, so if I search for Sentinel, now I don't have anything fancy set up. This is my little subscription here. But again, you can see it's built on a workspace. It's got a nice little overview page where it would show any instance I have, data received that's coming in from my different connectors, my analytics rules that I have. There's a nice content hub now. So the content hub, we used to focus on this data connectors, which will bring in data from a particular system. But now through the content hub, we just say, well, what is the service that we want to monitor? And it will then bring in the connectors we need for that. So I can just search for something I need, and it would then add the connectors I need to do that. It would go and set up, for example, the diagnostic settings if it's an Azure resource to go and send it to me. But here you can see the various connectors. I've got things like Azure Active Directory connected, but really use the Content Hub. So this is about getting the data in. Once the data is in, well, then it will start creating incidents when something's happened, when it's found some issue based on all of those feeds of data coming in and then alerting you to that. And it will then guide you through resolutions and what you should do. But there are workbooks that will help guide me through, hey, if there is something happening, it's great for visualization, high-level view. I don't need to be a coder to do this. Then I get the notebooks, which again is built on those Jupyter notebooks. So it's using Python, R. I can apply machine learning through these. These are more complex tasks. Could be a chain of tasks. Could be some procedural set of controls I need to use. But I can build those in. Hunting is a set of queries. So it's using, remember, it's Log Analytics Workspace underneath. So it's a whole set of KQL queries that I can run that might give me some sign of some problem happening. And it will tell me the different connectors I require. It's moaning I don't have the right connectors, for example, because I've not got a connector to DNS, so I won't have the events in my Log Analytics Workspace that this is looking for. But it's showing me those things. If you're used to the idea of, again, Log Analytics and Logic Apps, so we'll see, for example, I have automation. So I can have my automation rules. So these are some simpler things I can do. So if I create an automation rule, I don't have to create a whole logic app. I can just say, hey, if some incident is created or an incident is updated or an alert is created, if it contains some text, then just perform some simple action. Notice I can run a playbook, or I could just, hey, I want to change the status, change severity, change an owner. Or I can still go and create a playbook based on an incident happening, an alert happening, an entity trigger. I can go and look at entities. So an entity, for example, could be a user, so user entity behavior analytics. I could look at a certain user, I could look at a certain host, I could look at a certain IP address. If I'm used to the MITRE ATT&CK framework, so this is the whole adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge, it will show me where I have protections against that. So if I close that, if I've got MITRE ATT&CK, these are all the different areas, and I can go and see where I might have things that address the different types of attack in the environment. So really Sentinel is bringing together just fantastic insight and intelligence across all those different signals. Now, I've got a whole different video on this, which I would recommend to get more detail on, but this is the solution in Microsoft for my SIEM and my SOAR. And don't think it's just Azure. So I think I might have said Azure Sentinel. Obviously, it's Microsoft Sentinel because those feeds can come from everything. This can come from AWS. It can come from Google Cloud. It's not just restricted to Azure. On-premises things can feed into it as well. So two other things I did want to talk about just briefly. So managed identity and the idea around Azure Key Vault. Because when I start to think about security and reducing the chance of having some secret written somewhere, managed identity is huge. So if I think, what is this doing? Where possible, I don't want to have a password or even a certificate in some application configuration file or stored somewhere. It's easy to get published to GitHub accidentally or leaked. Managed identity ties the credential to the resource. Many services, pretty much all the services support this now. And I can have system assigned or user assigned. So, where have I got some space? This looks like a space. So I have a resource. Now, inside, let's say this resource is called resource 1. Could be a VM, could be a container host, could be an app service. And then obviously we have Azure AD. And then I have some process, some app running inside. And what it wants to do is it wants to go and communicate to some other resource. Maybe it's a database, maybe it's a storage account. It doesn't really matter. But this is resource 2. And resource 2, let's say, has data plane role-based access control. So I've got some role-based access control, and there's maybe a data reader role. Maybe I'll say data owner, I don't know. That this app needs permission to for here. Now in the past, I would create a service principal, they'd create a secret, and then that secret would have to get stored or accessible somewhere. Now you might say, oh, put it in Key Vault. How would I authenticate to Key Vault to get the secret out? I'd have to store a credential to connect to Key Vault. There's a chicken and egg problem. So what we can do is we use managed identity. Now there's two types. There is a system assigned managed identity. So I can say, hey, I want to turn on system assigned. System assigned is a one-to-one relationship. This managed identity can only be used for this resource. And what it's going to do up here is it's creating a managed identity, basically an identity called resource 1. Now, the exact mechanism this will work varies. Is it a VM? Is it an app service? Is it a pod? But this application wants to be able to talk to this resource. It needs a token. Doesn't have any stored. And so what the application is going to do is that application has the ability to talk to some endpoint. Now, if it was a VM, it would be the instance metadata service. If it was an app service, then there's a REST endpoint. But it's basically saying, hey, I need a token. So token, please. Whatever this buddy site is or sidecar, whatever that is, it goes and talks to Azure AD, shows it is this resource. This creates the token that it gives that passes to it. Now I can use that token. So the RBAC on this would be, okay, resource 1 has that role. And it's now going to have a token for this, which it can now go and use, and it's all happy. It passes, and it can access the resource. So the system assigned managed identity is fantastic when it's one resource needs a certain set of permissions on a whole bunch of resources. Then there's also the ability to create something called a user assigned managed identity. Then this is a separate resource, so it's a user assigned managed identity 1. And the whole point of this is this one identity can be used by n number of resources. So it's 1 to n. This would be useful. Imagine I had many resources that all needed the same set of permissions to a whole set of other resources. Rather than create 3 or 10 system assigned managed identities and all 10 had to be given these permissions, well, now I could say, hey, do you know what? For this group of resources, instead of giving you a system assigned, and I can have both, I'm assigning you, hey, you can use user assigned managed identity 1. So then it would be able to get a token as that identity, and then they could all use it, and user assigned managed identity 1 could all be given that certain permission. So if we was to go and look at this, just a super simple demo. So that demo VM I had earlier on, if I go to identity, we can see I've turned on the system assigned managed identity. I could also give it user assigned, which I've also done. So it's also got a user assigned. And then I can grant it roles. Now in this example, the roles I've given it is, well, it's actually got a few roles, but it's got a data plane storage blob data reader on this storage account. But it can also access certain secrets from Key Vault. So what I'm going to do is, this is that virtual machine. And right now I'm looking at the test folder and it's empty. So test folder, there's nothing in it. If I now go and look at some code, I'm going to connect to Azure, and I didn't give it a credential. I said -identity. That means used my default managed identity. Now I'm going to create a storage context, and I'm going to try and get a blob. And hopefully what will show up is that will work because it had the data plane permissions to that particular storage account. So it created the context using the managed identity, and now it's going and connecting to it and actually getting that blob. And then that file should show up. No such host is known. So it's errored on me. Oh, I know why. I didn't change the, oh, interesting. This is the wrong. So we'll fix this on the fly. I don't know why that is that file. So that's the wrong storage account. Storage account is that name. I copied the wrong file over. So if we quickly jump over again, the reason it failed is it's the wrong storage account name. And then also the pictures in that storage account, if we go and look at it, will be different than that name. But this, I guess it's good you can see, it's not set up. So images, and we'll just take this picture, Ollie and Eddie eating cereal. And again, that managed identity, if we look at the access control, while I'm in here anyway, we'll see it has blob data reader. So its managed identity has blob data reader. So it should be able to get to this. So then we'll change to blob. We're going to try and grab to that one. We run all those again. And it got it. So now if we look, there we go. So using the managed identity, it actually enabled us to go and connect, and there are my dogs eating some cereal. And also what I have in here, so the next one is actually connecting to Azure Key Vault. Because remember, we also had permission to Key Vault, but I've probably not updated this one either. So this would also actually be wrong. I don't know if I'll be bothered to go and change all these as well. But so there's a particular secret maybe I want to read. So if I looked at my Azure Key Vault, because this would be that chicken and egg. Maybe there is a secret I need, but how do I access the Key Vault? So if I looked at my Key Vault, for example, I've got two. So this would be my Key Vault name over here. So we change this name to this other value. And I need to get a certain secret. And let's say if we look at my secrets, secret 2. We'll look at secret 2. So I'm going to just query for secret 2. So now if I invoke the web request, I've got my token and run the query. So role assignment failed, do not have permission. So interesting, so I don't have permission to secret 2. Let's try secret 1. And that one worked. So notice how the role-based access control works. And I can see, okay, the value is password, super secure there. But you can see how powerful then that data plane control is. So clearly what I did is I only had permission to one of the secrets. So secret 2, access control, role assignments. If we go and look here at like Key Vault Reader, so MI secret 1, the user assigned has it, but not the machine. Whereas if I look at secret 1, I'm expecting I will see the demo VM has that secrets, user role. So sometimes it's nice when things fail. We can actually go and see that role-based access control is really taking effect for those particular resources. So my whole point of the managed identity is I don't have to store any configuration anywhere. It's just native to the resource. And then anything running inside the resource can act as that identity and get access to things without me having to store anything. And then you saw Key Vault. So we was like, okay, so that was weird. I was looking at a secret in Key Vault. Sometimes I still have to have a secret. Sometimes I still have to have a key. Sometimes I have to have a certificate. This is the place to store it. So it supports keys, certificates, secrets. There's a rotation policy now for keys. And I guess let's just quickly explain what these things are. So here is a certain type of resource, but we also have Azure Key Vault. We support 3 types of thing. Secrets. So what is the difference? So a secret, I can read and write it. Password, I need to store it. I need to be able to get it back out. Keys. Keys I can import into it. I can generate them inside it. And I can perform cryptographic operations. I cannot export it. I cannot get the key out. And then we have certificates. Those are all really about distribution and the life cycle management. So I have these 3 different types of things. So keys are commonly used with bring your own key, customized key on anything data at rest. This is where that key would get stored. And one of the nice things is keys shouldn't just last forever. So what I can have, I can do auto rotation policy. So I could say, hey, every 18 months, rotate the key. And then a lot of services will automatically see there's a new version of the key, because I have versions, and then start using it for that encryption of the data. And the key, there's 2 different ways that we can do the Azure Key Vault security. So there's an access policy, which is really the old type. Access policy was these roles have these permissions for these types of resource in the key vault. I couldn't be granular. It couldn't be different people could have different permissions to different secrets like what you saw. So I'd have to create different key vaults for any different combination of permissions. Whereas the new RBAC access model, as you saw, at a per object level can have different permissions. So this is the one you're basically going to use. You want to use the role-based access control. I can use Azure Policy for governance to say, hey, I need these particular configurations. I need these settings applied. And it can even be an event source for Event Grid. So, hey, something happens, go and trigger these actions. So I rotate a key, go and do these other configurations to really make it take effect. So if I do have a secret, use Azure Key Vault. If I have a key, if I have a cert. And remember, I can use them together. So if I do have to have permissions, so that it supports, use the RBAC mode, what I could absolutely do, as you saw, is I could say, hey, secret one, well, for secret one, the managed identity, you have secrets user. So there's no chicken and egg problem. I don't have to have a credential to authenticate to the key vault. I use the managed identity to authenticate to key vault to then go and get the thing that I couldn't natively do. Most things support Azure AD-based authentication for the data plane, but if it didn't, if it had to use a secret, if it had to use an access signature or an access key, store the key in here, control the permissions to the key using the managed identity of the resource. Nowhere is there any kind of actual token stored in a config file that gets accidentally put on GitHub. So if I need to go and get the secret, I'm using my managed identity and that token because it has permissions to the resource. And that was it. So that was our security and monitoring dive in. As always, I hope that was useful. As always, we covered a lot, but I think it's really important to understand the types of data we can get. It's important to understand what we can do with that data, bringing them together for monitoring, for alerting, feeding into security. Get that good hygiene first. Like if we're patching, if we've got the firewall, if we've got the antivirus, we've got good configuration, we've got good policy, it's 90% of the battle. And then we can apply the monitoring. Then we apply the threat protection to give us that complete protection. So that was it. As always, till the next video, take care.